who out there remembers Baten Kaitos? I know I do. I played Baten Kaitos and Baten Kaitos 2 almost religiously when those games came out. Obviously, over the years, I've been a big RPG fan, a big JRPG fan, but something about these games was different. Obviously, in specific, the card mechanics of building a deck and doing card-based attacks. It essentially combined, at the time anyways, two of my favorite things together. Video game RPGs along with playing card tactics, which is something I enjoyed in things like the Pokemon trading card game and Magic the Gathering. So combining those things together into a video game, into an RPG style video game, and that just had a lot of appeal to me, and I ultimately love those games, and I love the story, and I remember very vividly my entire experience with Baten Kaitos 1 and 2. Well, it appears that Baten Kaitos 3 was actually in development at one point. And this is important to me because Baten Kaitos is one series I would love to see return on a Nintendo platform, in particular the Switch, where I think being able to play that sort of game anywhere makes a lot of sense. And no, I'm not just talking about old game ports. I would actually like to see Baten Kaitos 3 become a thing. And as it turns out, it was in development. And this information is actually from Yusayuki Hone, who was the series director at Monolith Soft, because if you guys remember, Baten Kaitos was a game developed by Monolith Soft, a studio now owned by Nintendo. And he said this: "It's been more than 10 years since the release of Baten Kaitos 2, and even now it pains me that I continue to receive requests for a sequel. I think the statute of limitations has run out, so I can say a little bit about it. Immediately after the release of Baten Kaitos 2, Namco, now Bandai Namco, worked on a sequel up until the pre-production phase. But just before Baten Kaitos 3 could become a reality, the story ended due to the circumstances of the involved parties. If we made it, it would have been a grand-scale game with settings at the bottom of the sea, on land, and in the sky. There's a large amount of concept art for the sequel sealed away at Bandai Namco. Requests for a sequel should be directed not just to myself and Monolith Soft, but also to Bandai Namco." So he actually said this on Twitter because he constantly gets requests for a new Baten Kaitos game. As the director of the game and also still working at the studio that created the game, it's a natural ask. But what needs to be remembered is that technically Monolith Soft does not own the rights to the Baten Kaitos IP. The Bandai Namco actually owns the rights to it. So while Monolith Soft would love to possibly make another one, and maybe even Nintendo would be all for it, ultimately neither one of those companies can decide whether it goes forward. It has to be decided by the people who own the IP rights. For those who don't know, if you're looking for a similar situation, in case you're curious, the Bayonetta series is technically owned by Sega. They were the ones that produced, or were the production company to put out the original Bayonetta, and as such, Sega owns the IP rights for the Bayonetta franchise. So yes, while the agreements in place for Bayonetta 2 and 3 may keep them as Nintendo exclusives for a very, very long time, reality is Sega's still going to be in the credits because Sega had to give permission for the IP to be used by Nintendo and, again, Platinum Games. So this is a case where Baten Kaitos 3, in order for it to be made, you can't just keep requesting the director of the series and Monolith Soft make it, because in order for it to be done, Bandai Namco has to first want it to be done, and either one, release the IP rights and just allow them to make the game willy-nilly as long as they get their 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% cut or whatever it is. 2, sell the rights to the series to Nintendo directly, which I think a lot of us might appreciate, since it very much appears Bandai Namco does not care about that IP anymore. And with the resurgence of RPGs at Nintendo, JRPGs in particular with Monolith Soft, it might be a purchase, depending on the price, Nintendo might actually consider if it was available. Not that Nintendo can't inquire about it, but ultimately Bandai Namco has to make the decision on if they want to do that. Or lastly, Bandai Namco, since they do technically work very closely with Nintendo, they are one of the developers on the Super Smash Bros. Series, especially the new one coming out now, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. It would make a lot of sense for Bandai Namco to approach Nintendo and be like, hey, look, you guys own the company that we were using before to make the Baten Kaitos series. Why don't we make another Baten Kaitos game? And we'll cover part of the development cost, or we'll allow you to do it and we just want our little cut, or whatever the case may be. Whatever agreement they can come to make that. I'm sure Nintendo would be very forthcoming, since there is an old school following for Baten Kaitos 1 and 2 on Nintendo platforms. Whether or not it would sell extremely well beats me. I can't even recall what the sales for the original series were. Obviously well enough to at least get one sequel and to consider a third, but yeah, it's interesting when we think about why it was canceled, because we don't really have any details on why the Baten Kaitos series just stopped. Many people just assumed, well, Baten Kaitos 2 didn't sell well enough, so that was that. But it's interesting because it was in development and it ended due to circumstances of the involved parties. I wonder if, was this around the time that Bandai Namco was considering getting rid of Monolith Soft, and where Nintendo started to become a player in that and potentially purchasing the studio? Because remember, Monolith Soft wasn't always a Nintendo studio. We need to be very clear about that. Nintendo didn't always own Monolith Soft, so is that what happened? And in the shuffle there, just kind of stopped, or maybe Bandai Namco was a bit sour on the deal going to Nintendo, so they just canceled everything. Again, due to circumstances of the involved parties, sounds like it was something behind the scenes rather than something about us as a consumer base not wanting it and not buying enough copies. So that kind of sucks when that happens. That's the business side of things. Things could fall apart. I mean, this is why PlayStation exists as a separate brand from Nintendo today, because something behind the scenes, through no fault of the fans, fell apart between Sony and Nintendo when it came to making a joint platform that could use cartridges and discs. It could have been revolutionary. It could have dominated the world, but instead, Nintendo reneged for whatever reason, and Sony created their own PlayStation platform. So this is just a very interesting situation to me, and I'm very curious, do you guys even want a Baten Kaitos 3? Do you think it's just been too long and it's time for the series to be delayed to rest? Do you think maybe they need to remaster the first couple games before we can get the new one? Because there'll be so many gamers today that don't even know what this series is. They don't remember GameCube-era gaming very well, especially when there hasn't been sequels to these games in forever. It's something that I want to throw to you guys and get your thoughts on this, because for me, I fondly remember Baten Kaitos, just like I fondly remembered Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles that we're now getting a remaster of. What do you think is the best approach to bring this franchise back, and how do you think is the best method to let Bandai Namco know that we really want this game? Probably, Twitter is one method, of course. They obviously pay attention when they're tweeted at so many times about one specific thing. It's hard not to notice it, someone at the company not to notice it. Just like Nintendo noticed with the cancer patient and Chris Taylor, or obviously the developer here of the Baten Kaitos series, the director anyways, noting that people keep asking him on Twitter about it, so he responded on Twitter and said, hey, look, it's not really up to us. We would love to do it, but you gotta request it of Bandai Namco as well, or it's a non-starter. Like, we can want to do it all we want, but ultimately Bandai Namco has to let us do it. Yeah, and what are your thoughts in general on the Baten Kaitos series? If you have played it, did you like it? Do you think it was overhyped? Do you think it's way better than you remember? Have you played it recently? Let me know all this information down in the comments below. Anyways, folks, I'm Nathaniel Rufflejans from Nintendo Prime, and if you like this video, you know what to do, and if you dislike the video, hit that dislike button, subscribe for more content, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Yes.